You become most suspicious at the exact moment nothing is wrong. Someone answers when they said they would, remembers what mattered to you, and does not make you earn the return of their warmth. Your chest tightens anyway. You read the simple message twice, searching for the demand that must be hidden inside it, then feel an impulse to wait before replying so you do not appear too relieved. The quiet between you is not hostile, yet you keep listening for the change in temperature, a delayed word, a shorter sentence, or an ordinary tiredness can pull your attention away from everything else. Your nervous system is not reading this person. It is reading a pattern it learned long before they arrived. What unsettles you is not only the possibility that affection may disappear, it is the stranger possibility that it may remain, and that you will have no familiar task to perform in order to keep it. This is why consistency can feel less like freedom than enclosure. Uncertain love kept you moving. It gave you signals to interpret, distances to close, moods to repair, and small victories that proved you still mattered. Steady care removes those assignments. It leaves you face to face with a question that urgency once concealed. If no one is withdrawing, persuading, or testing you, what tells you that love is alive? You may call the uneasiness a lack of chemistry. You may decide the other person is too available, too calm, or somehow difficult to feel. Yet, the absence of intensity is not necessarily the absence of connection. Sometimes, intensity was the sensation of attachment becoming uncertain, followed by the relief of briefly securing it again. The relief felt like love because relief was the part your nervous system had been trained to recognize. The trap is not the person who treats you well. The trap is the sudden loss of the emotional work that once gave closeness its shape. When affection arrives without confusion, you cannot use vigilance as devotion. You cannot prove care by detecting danger early. You cannot turn another person's inconsistency into evidence of your depth. What remains may be gentler, but gentleness gives you fewer ways to feel necessary. Notice how quickly an ordinary kindness becomes an account you expect to settle. They bring you something you mentioned once, and your mind begins calculating what would make the exchange even. They listen without taking over, and you search for the moment when their patience will become leverage. Your mouth prepares gratitude, but your stomach prepares for obligation. Receiving has already been translated into debt. This translation can happen even when the other person has asked for nothing. That response does not wait for evidence, because evidence was never what organized it. It was organized by unpredictability. Care once arrived beside withdrawal, criticism, distraction, or a mood you had to decode. The gift and the danger were close enough together that your attention learned to hold both at once. Now safety resembles the first half of an old sequence. Warmth comes, but some part of you expects the reversal that used to follow. You do not relax into affection because relaxation once reduced your preparation. You remain slightly outside the moment, watching it happen, preserving enough distance to notice when the price appears. What looks like mistrust is also a refusal to be surprised in the same way again. But that explanation is still incomplete. Vigilance does more than protect you from disappointment. It protects you from being received. When another person remains kind without demanding performance, Your competence no longer controls the terms of closeness. You cannot secure your place by anticipating everything. You must be present as someone with preferences, limits, awkward needs, and no set method for making yourself indispensable. That is more exposing than managing uncertainty. In an unstable bond, you could focus on the other person's signals and postpone the question of whether they truly knew you. Their distance gave you work, and the work gave you identity. In a steady bond, attention moves in both directions. The other person begins to notice where you disappear, where you say it does not matter, and where your ease is carefully performed. Through a Jungian lens, this is where a complex becomes visible. It is not merely a memory of earlier pain. It is an emotional structure that assigns meaning before conscious thought arrives. Consistency enters the present, but an earlier structure interprets it using a formal language. Calm becomes suspicious. Availability becomes pressure. Kindness becomes a contract whose missing clauses you assume you have failed to find. You might then create a little uncertainty yourself. You delay an honest answer, conceal how much you care, or choose the least revealing version of what you want. Perhaps you become unusually alert to small imperfections. None of this has to be deliberate. Distance restores a familiar rhythm. Once closeness becomes slightly unstable, your attention sharpens, your role returns, and the relationship feels emotionally legible again. The painful reversal is that what you call caution may also be an attempt to recover intensity. You are not inventing danger for pleasure. You are trying to locate yourself inside a form of love whose movements you understand. Uncertainty offers a position. You can wait, interpret, improve, endure, and finally feel the rush of contact returning. Reliability gives you presence, but presence may initially feel like having nothing to hold. This appears in small moments that are easy to misread. A peaceful evening ends without conflict, yet afterward you feel oddly empty. A conversation remains warm even after disagreement, yet you replay it as if something decisive was missed. Someone accepts your limit without punishment, and instead of relief you feel a faint loss of importance. The expected rupture never comes, so the repairer inside you has no entrance. You may even miss people who made you uncertain more intensely than you value someone who remains. Missing is active. It fills the mind with unfinished exchanges, revised explanations, and imagined returns. Stable affection does not occupy thought in the same way. It does not demand constant rehearsal. The mind can mistake this reduction in mental occupation for emotional shallowness, when it may simply be the end of compulsory monitoring. Safe love can therefore feel like being asked to surrender a highly developed intelligence. You learn to notice pauses, shifts in tone, incomplete answers, and the difference between a person's words and their emotional availability. Those perceptions may be real. The difficulty begins when perception is no longer a capacity you possess, but the only instrument through which closeness feels meaningful. Without uncertainty, the instrument has nothing urgent to measure. Your attention returns to you, and that return may be unwelcome. You notice how rarely you name a desire before considering its effect on someone else. You notice that being chosen does not immediately teach you how to choose. The relationship is no longer asking you to win your place, yet you still do not know what you would do from inside a place that is not threatened. This is not a simple story of an early wound repeating forever. Sometimes uncertainty became persuasive later, through relationships where rare tenderness carried unusual force because it followed absence. Sometimes competence at work or home made you valuable whenever others became unreliable. Over time, the alternating pattern joined affection to effort so tightly that unearned warmth began to feel emotionally unconvincing. The hidden bargain was not only that you tolerated inconsistency in exchange for connection, you also received protection from the risk of mutuality. If the other person remained difficult to reach, your longing could stay pure because it never had to become ordinary. You could imagine what complete closeness would feel like without allowing another person to encounter your impatience, ambivalence, dependence, or changing desire. Uncertainty kept love in a state of potential. Potential can be painful, but it is difficult to disprove. A steady relationship brings love into daily life, where it must exist beside fatigue. En errand, different preferences, and moments that carry no emotional charge. The ideal bond becomes an actual bond. What feels like disappointment may partly be grief for the beautiful possibility that reality can no longer preserve untouched. This is where your suspicion becomes morally confusing. You do not want to punish kindness, and you may genuinely care for the person offering it. Yet your reactions do not match your conscious values. Your shoulders rise when they move closer. Your breath shortens when they ask what you need. You hear concern as examination, then feel ashamed that tenderness has reached you as pressure. Shame makes the pattern harder to see because it turns a learned response into a character verdict. You tell yourself you are incapable of healthy love, ungrateful, or secretly drawn to suffering. None of these judgments explains the precision of the reaction. The uneasiness appears exactly where the old role loses authority. It rises when you cannot earn, predict, or regulate the affection being offered. The question beneath the fear is not simply whether this person is safe. It is whether you can remain psychologically present when safety does not give you a function. Can affection exist without turning you into the interpreter, the stabilizer, or the one who waits more faithfully? That question reaches deeper than trust because it asks what love becomes when your usefulness is no longer standing between you and another person. From a depth psychology perspective, the persona that managed uncertain love may have been both sincere and protective. Your attentiveness was real, your patience was real, your ability to understand mixed signals may still belong to you. The division began when these qualities became compulsory, when connection seemed possible only through the version of you that could absorb ambiguity without making a claim of its own. Steady affection disturbs that persona by refusing to reward its disappearance. The other person asks what you prefer, waits through your uncertainty, and does not accept the polished answer as the whole answer. This can feel intrusive even when it is respectful. You are accustomed to closeness organized around another person's difficulty. Attention directed toward your interior life can feel like entry into a place you kept private in order to stay attached. There is another reversal here. What feels like being trapped may be the loss of an exit you once kept hidden. In uncertain love, part of you was always preparing for abandonment, but part of you was also protected from full arrival. You could blame instability for the distance that remained. When someone stays, the distance becomes yours to notice. You can no longer explain every absence of intimacy through their absence. This does not mean every reliable person is right for you, or that discomfort proves a relationship is good. Consistency is not the same as intimacy, and kindness does not erase incompatibility. The deeper distinction is more exact. When calm itself becomes the evidence against connection, the old pattern may be judging the present by how closely it reproduces the emotional weather in which love first became recognizable. What begins to emerge is not certainty about the relationship, but a different way of reading your reaction. The tightening chest is no longer a verdict. The missing rush is no longer proof of missing love. The impulse to retreat may contain information, but it may also contain a familiar demand for a task. Several truths can arrive in the same moment, and none of them needs to become the whole meaning. For now, the unfamiliar fact is simply that care can remain after you stop managing its temperature. A disagreement can end without emotional exile. A need can be heard without becoming a burden that must be repaid. These moments may not feel liberating. They may feel strangely quiet, almost unfinished, because that sequence trained you to expect love to disappear before its value became visible. The deeper structure begins to show itself there. You were not only afraid that safe love would become a trap, you were afraid that, inside it, the person built for uncertainty would have no necessary work left to do. The affection might remain, the other person might remain, and you would have to discover whether you could remain too, without earning the right to be there. That right was rarely earned through one dramatic event. It was assembled through repetition. Affection appeared, then became difficult to reach. Attention warmed, then moved elsewhere. You learned that connection was not something you simply occupied. It was something whose conditions had to be noticed quickly, before a change in mood turned closeness into doubt. Perhaps no one intended to teach you this. The people around you may have been loving and still emotionally inconsistent, generous and still preoccupied, present in one moment and unavailable in the next. The psyche does not require deliberate harm in order to form a pattern. It only requires repetition strong enough to make uncertainty seem like the natural climate of attachment. You began to notice which version of you made warmth easier to recover. Need could complicate the atmosphere, while attentiveness improved it. Disagreement could lengthen the distance, while understanding shortened it. You became skilled at finding the exact adjustment that brought connection back. The return of affection then seemed to confirm that the adjustment had been necessary. This was how sensitivity became labor. You did not merely perceive another person's state, you treated that state as information about your place with them. Their tiredness became a question about what you had done. Their quiet became a task whose correct solution might restore ease. The distinction between noticing another person and becoming responsible for the bond gradually disappeared. Giving offered an answer to the helplessness of waiting. If you could anticipate, soothe, explain, or remain exceptionally patient. You did not have to sit inside the uncertainty of whether someone would choose closeness freely. Action replaced exposure. Even when the effort exhausted you, It gave you something more tolerable than dependence. It gave you a way to influence what love might do next. The deeper reward was not praise. It was predictability. Being useful made belonging measurable because usefulness produced visible results. A problem softened, a mood lifted, a conflict ended, or someone returned. You could point to the effect of what you had done. Being loved for your presence offered no such measurement. It asked you to trust a bond that could not be secured through performance. This is why giving can feel generous and controlled at the same time. The care may be completely sincere, yet by becoming the person who contributes first, notices first, and needs least, you reduce the number of moments in which another person can fail you. You keep the emotional economy active, but you also decide which currency will count. Competence becomes protection against disappointment. Receiving interrupts that protection. It places you in the part of the exchange where another person chooses whether to notice, remember, and respond. Their care might arrive, but you cannot manufacture its sincerity. You cannot perform their willingness for them. What feels like passivity is actually contact with an old uncertainty, the uncertainty of being valuable when you are not producing the evidence yourself. So you may repay before the care has had time to reach you. You turn a kind act into immediate usefulness, offer reassurance after being comforted, or make the conversation about the other person's needs. The balance is restored so quickly that mutuality never becomes visible. Nothing is owed, but nothing is fully received either. The exchange remains safe because you have returned to the familiar side of it. Notice how quickly the body moves. They set the plate in front of you, and your hand has already reached for the empty glass beside it. Your shoulders lift before the first bite. Thanks forms in your mouth while your legs are preparing to stand. To carry, to restore a balance no one asked you to correct. The care had barely landed. Something in you could not stay still long enough to be fed. Over time, relationships organize themselves around this speed. People may come to rely on your anticipation because anticipation leaves little space for them to develop their own attention. They may not be exploiting you. They may simply adapt to the role you occupy before anyone else can reach it. Your readiness teaches the relationship that your contribution is certain, while your need is optional. Then a strange inequality appears without anyone openly choosing it. You know the details of other people's lives, while they know the polished summary of yours. You remember the difficult date, sense when something has shifted, and prepare for what has not yet been requested. When they ask how you are, the honest answer feels too unstructured, too slow, and too likely to change the terms of connection. From a depth psychology perspective, this is how an old complex becomes architecture. It no longer appears only as fear. It assigns roles, distributes attention, and shapes what each person comes to expect. The pattern repeats not because you consciously want uncertainty, but because you keep entering relationships through the capacities. Uncertainty developed most strongly in you. You may choose people who seem unusually deep because they are difficult to read. Their inconsistency creates a field in which your sensitivity becomes valuable at once. Another person who communicates plainly can seem less psychologically compelling because there is less hidden material for you to interpret. Mystery feels like depth when interpretation has long been one of your primary forms of intimacy. Projection can enter quietly here. You may place extraordinary emotional possibility inside someone whose actual availability remains limited, because so much must be inferred. The missing parts can be filled with meaning. Their rare moments of openness appear to reveal a hidden person waiting beneath the difficulty. Your capacity to perceive potential then becomes a reason to remain loyal to what is rarely present. The reversal is not that you imagined everything. You may have perceived tenderness, fear, and genuine attachment accurately. The deeper problem is that perception allowed potential to carry the weight of participation. You related not only to what the person consistently offered, but to what you knew they might offer under different conditions. Understanding became a bridge they did not have to cross. This pattern can make disappointment feel like a failure of interpretation. Instead of asking whether enough care is present, you search for the explanation that will make its absence emotionally coherent. Perhaps they are afraid, overwhelmed, ashamed, or unable to express what they feel. The explanation may be true, yet truth about their difficulty does not create the mutuality their difficulty prevents. The same architecture appears outside romance. At work, you notice what will be forgotten and absorb confusion before it spreads. So recognition arrives through crisis while a calm week leaves you oddly invisible. In friendship, you are contacted for perspective and patient attention, and you may value those conversations, yet leave them strangely untouched, because the bond forms around your capacity to hold complexity rather than your own. Even rest becomes charged. When you stop anticipating, someone else must remember, initiate, or carry the consequence of their own inattention. And the guilt that follows is not about inactivity. It is the fear that if the system functions without you, your importance becomes less measurable. The arrangement therefore postpones preference. Before asking what you want, you calculate what will preserve connection. Before expressing disappointment, you decide whether the other person can bear it. Before receiving pleasure, you check whether anyone nearby has been left without support. Desire becomes delayed so consistently that it no longer arrives as a clear voice. It appears as irritation, fatigue, or inexplicable distance. The postponement has a physical address. Your jaw sets before the sentence has formed. Your breath shortens in the half second after someone asks what you would like, and the honest answer moves back down your throat before it reaches air. By the time you speak, the words have already been adjusted. The body completed the calculation before you knew a calculation had been requested. What Jungian thought calls the unlived life is not always a dramatic, abandoned dream. It may be the accumulation of ordinary responses that were never allowed to become choices. The meal you did not prefer, the help you did not request, the anger softened before it formed, the afternoon spent repairing a mood that was not yours. A life can disappear through adjustments too small to be remembered. This is why safe affection does more than challenge your expectations of another person. It begins to expose how little room your own desire has occupied. When no crisis organizes the bond, preference becomes audible, but it may not sound graceful. You may want more space, less conversation, a different plan, or care in a form the other person did not anticipate. Mutuality introduces difference, not permanent agreement. Uncertain love often allowed difference to remain secondary because the main task was preserving contact. Safe love brings difference closer. Two people can remain connected while wanting opposing things, but the complex reads opposition as the beginning of withdrawal. You may therefore agree too quickly, then feel trapped by an arrangement you helped create through the concealment of your own position. The feeling of entrapment can arise after a series of invisible compliances. Nothing was forced. No single request was unreasonable. Yet each time your preference appeared, you translated it into what would be easiest for the bond. Eventually, the relationship seems to contain too little of you. Safety receives the blame. Although self-concealment entered before safety had the chance to become mutual, this does not make the other person innocent of every failure. A consistent partner can still avoid depth, misunderstand you, or enjoy the ease your familiar role provides. Reliable behavior is not proof of emotional reciprocity. The more difficult recognition is that mutuality cannot be judged only by whether someone stays. It is revealed by what can exist between two people without one person disappearing to preserve it. As the pattern weakens, care may begin to feel slower and less dramatic. Another person asks rather than assumes. They allow your answer to inconvenience them without treating inconvenience as betrayal. Yet this can stir irritation because being asked places responsibility for preference back in your hands. The familiar role made you burdened, but it also protected you from openly choosing. Choice carries a risk that usefulness avoided. If you state what you want and the other person remains, then you are known more clearly. If they cannot meet you, the difference is also clear. There is less ambiguity to interpret and less potential to preserve. Mutuality does not guarantee agreement. It removes some of the fog that once allowed attachment to continue without a direct encounter between two separate people. That encounter is what the architecture resists. It was built to maintain connection through adjustment, not to discover what connection can tolerate. It knows how to restore warmth after distance, but not how to let affection coexist with frustration. It knows how to become valuable, but not how to remain visible while another person is disappointed. Safety asks for capacities this system had little reason to develop. The consequence is subtle. A loving relationship may remain externally stable while becoming organized around your anticipation. The other person feels cared for. You feel increasingly enclosed, and neither understands why generosity has produced distance. What is missing is not affection. It is the experience of your unedited presence, altering the relationship without automatically threatening its existence. This is where that architecture begins to endanger the ordinary life that consistency made possible. It can turn every quiet period into evidence of emotional absence, every act of care into an obligation, and every difference into a forecast of loss. The bond may be safe, yet the pattern keeps asking it to recreate uncertainty before love can feel vivid enough to believe. That demand can remain invisible because it rarely sounds unreasonable inside you. You are not asking for drama, you are asking for reassurance that the drama will never return. Yet, no relationship can provide that proof in advance. Another person can be consistent without becoming perfectly readable, and the smallest remainder of uncertainty may feel large enough to cancel everything their consistency has shown. A familiar tone changes slightly at the end of the day. Their answer is warm but brief, and your neck stiffens before you decide what it means. By the time they explain that they are tired, you have already reviewed the previous conversation for evidence. Their explanation may settle the facts, but the reaction remains active because facts were never the only thing being examined. What you are measuring is whether safety can remain intact through an interruption. The pattern assumes that warmth is real only while it is continuously visible. A quiet hour, a private mood, or attention directed elsewhere can feel like a withdrawal of the bond itself. Consistency has been present for months, but one ambiguous moment receives more psychological authority than all the ordinary returns that came before it. This is one difficulty of living inside reliable love. Reliability is made of repetition, not constant intensity. It becomes visible across time, through small repairs, kept promises, honest limits, and the absence of punishment after difference. The complex does not naturally count this evidence. It notices departure faster than return, because departure once required immediate action. You may therefore keep an internal record whose logic is impossible for the other person to understand. Their care becomes background, while each lapse becomes a significant entry. 10 quiet acts of presence merge into normality. One distracted response becomes revelation. The record feels objective because every detail is real. Yet the weight assigned to each detail belongs to an earlier emotional system. The first cost is that care cannot accumulate. Nothing the other person offers is allowed to become history strong enough to support the present. Every day begins as a new examination. A loving pattern may exist, but one imperfect moment can return the relationship to uncertainty. The person beside you is not only relating to you, they are repeatedly being asked to disprove someone else's inconsistency. They may initially answer with patience. They explain more carefully, send another message, or make their affection more explicit. For a while, this brings relief. Yet, reassurance given under examination has a different emotional texture from care offered freely. It begins to carry tension. The more proof is required, the less spontaneous closeness becomes. And that loss of spontaneity may then look like further evidence. The pattern can create the very restraint it fears. Another person begins choosing words carefully because an ordinary pause may be interpreted as distance. They hesitate before naming frustration because your chest closes and the entire bond seems to enter the conversation. What began as their attempt to protect connection can make them less natural, while their restraint makes you feel that something hidden is forming. This is not your fault in the simple sense, and it is not entirely outside your participation. The distinction matters. A learned reaction arrives without permission, but the relationship is affected by what happens after it arrives. Fear may be inherited from another time, while its consequences belong to the present exchange between two adults who can both become less visible inside it. The shadow appears precisely where your conscious identity feels most innocent. You may think of yourself as the one who only wants honesty, steadiness, and emotional clarity. Those desires are real. Beneath them may also live a forbidden wish to control when distance occurs. Who feels it first, and who must cross it? If uncertainty is inevitable, Creating it yourself can feel less helpless than receiving it unexpectedly. So you become quieter after a good evening. You wait to see whether they will notice. You say nothing is wrong while hoping they will remain close enough to prove that something matters. Perhaps you delay warmth, not as punishment, but as an unconscious test. Their pursuit briefly restores the old evidence of love. You feel wanted because someone has crossed a distance that did not exist until the pattern needed measurement. This is the difficult reversal. Part of you may not only fear inconsistency, part of you may use small absences to make affection visible. A steady bond can feel emotionally pale until a separation gives reunion its familiar brightness. The wish is not cruelty. It is the old intelligence trying to produce the sequence in which love once became undeniable. Afterward, shame can arrive quickly. You recognize that the other person was asked to solve a fear they did not create, and you may turn against yourself, but self-condemnation repeats the same harsh logic. It imagines that one conflicted act erases every sincere intention. The shadow is not proof that your love is false. It reveals that love and control can coexist when vulnerability has not yet found another form. There may also be anger when reassurance does not work for long. You wanted the right words to settle something permanently, but their effect fades, and the need returns. The anger may be directed at the other person for failing to reach you, then inward for being unreachable. Neither judgment recognizes that reassurance cannot become an external replacement for the history your reactions are still carrying. Safe love cannot mean the permanent removal of ambiguity. It can only reveal what happens when ambiguity appears. Does distance become punishment, or can it remain temporary? Does disagreement threaten affection, or can affection hold a difference it does not resolve? Does another person's private mood become your assignment, or can their interior life remain separate without becoming evidence against you? These distinctions may sound modest, but they alter the entire emotional meaning of closeness. The earlier arrangement promised connection through accurate prediction. Mutuality offers no such promise. It allows two people to be separate without treating separateness as abandonment. What feels unsafe is not always a sign of approaching loss. Sometimes it is the sensation of not managing what another person is allowed to feel. The body may resist this separation before the mind understands it. Your stomach drops when they ask for an evening alone. Your shoulders lift when they say they need time to think. Even a respectful limit can activate the old expectation that private space is where affection disappears. The present moment becomes crowded with every earlier silence whose ending you could not predict. Yet the new difficulty is not simply enduring those reactions. It is allowing the other person to remain a person while they occur. Their tiredness cannot always become evidence about you. Their limit cannot always become a referendum on the bond. Their failure to respond perfectly cannot automatically erase the larger pattern. Safe love becomes real only when safety includes human limitation rather than demanding flawless attention. This can feel like lowering your standards, especially if you once excused too much. You may fear that any tolerance will return you to self-abandonment, but discernment and vigilance are not identical. Discernment watches what repeats across time. Vigilance gives one charged moment the power to explain everything. One can recognize a pattern, the other must decide before the pattern has had time to reveal itself. The difference becomes visible after an ordinary disappointment. Someone forgets something important, and the hurt is real. The trained response either minimizes the hurt to protect connection or enlarges it into proof that connection was never secure. Mutuality permits a more difficult middle ground. The failure matters. The history also matters, and neither has to erase the other before your reaction is allowed to exist. You may discover that safe love exposes anger more directly than uncertain love did. When connection felt fragile, anger had to be converted into understanding. In a reliable bond, the anger has somewhere to appear because it does not immediately destroy contact. This can make the relationship feel more conflictual, even though the conflict may be evidence that less of you is disappearing inside it. The return of anger is not automatically wisdom. It can still wound, accuse, or ask the present to pay for the past. Yet, its appearance contains information that compliance concealed. You wanted something, a limit was crossed, a difference mattered. The task is no longer to preserve an image of harmony. The deeper question is whether two people can remain visible while the feeling moves between them. Receiving care becomes equally complicated. When the other person responds well, relief may be followed by suspicion that you have influenced them unfairly. You may rush to soften your need, praise them excessively, or promise that nothing more will be required. The care lands for a moment, then you convert it into proof that you remain easy to love. The old bargain returns through gratitude, but gratitude and indebtedness are not the same. Gratitude recognizes what was given. Indebtedness imagines that receiving has altered your moral position. If care makes you immediately less free to disagree, rest, or ask again, then it has not yet become mutuality inside you. It has entered the older economy where every kindness changes who is permitted to need and who must restore balance. The unfamiliar capacity begins in moments so ordinary that they may barely register. Someone helps, and the exchange ends without your immediate repayment. You name a preference, and the evening continues, even though it changes the plan. A misunderstanding is repaired, but neither person performs perfect innocence. Nothing dramatic happens. That absence of drama is precisely what makes the experience difficult to trust. There is grief inside this ordinary calm. It reveals how much of your former devotion was organized around waiting for emotional weather to change. It also reveals that some past bonds may never have become mutual. No matter how accurately you understood them, the grief is not only for what was done to you, it is for the years when effort looked so much like intimacy that you could not separate them. You may miss the vividness of those years without wanting their pain again. This contradiction does not invalidate the change. A psyche can grieve an old intensity because intensity gave time a shape, attention, a target, and identity, a purpose. Calm asks you to inhabit hours that are not moving toward rupture or reunion. At first, those hours can feel emotionally unfinished. What slowly becomes harder to dismiss is the fact that quiet affection leaves more of you intact. After a disagreement, you still recognize your own thoughts. After receiving care, you are not smaller. After another person's difficult mood, your entire day does not have to become an explanation. These are not dramatic victories. They are ordinary signs that connection is no longer requiring disappearance as its entrance fee. The old complex still speaks in the language of urgency. It still claims that love must be proven now, that distance must be closed now, and that uncertainty must be solved before life can continue. Yet another experience has begun to exist beside it. Affection has remained through imperfect moments, and the part of you that expected collapse can no longer say it has seen no other possibility. Safety remains unfamiliar because it does not silence every reaction. It changes what the reaction is allowed to mean. The tightening chest may still arrive, the test may still tempt you, and calm may still feel incomplete. But the relationship no longer has to become uncertain, merely to prove that love can cross the distance uncertainty creates. That other possibility first changes the relationship in ways neither person may know how to name. A pause occurs, and you do not immediately close it. The other person notices your attention has not rushed toward them. They may ask whether something is wrong, because they too have grown accustomed to the version of closeness in which you carried every change before it became visible. Your reduced anticipation can initially feel like distance to them. They were not necessarily demanding your vigilance, yet they benefited from its speed. Plans happened without much negotiation. Frustration was softened before it reached them. Care arrived before they recognized a need. When this movement slows, they encounter the labor that had made the relationship feel unusually easy. Some people respond by becoming more attentive. They begin remembering what you once remembered for everyone, asking questions they previously assumed you would answer, and tolerating the awkwardness of not being managed. Their care may be clumsy because mutuality is new to the relationship. Not only to you, the unfamiliarity belongs to the arrangement between you rather than to one person alone. Others may feel accused even when no accusation has been made. Your preference can sound like criticism because the former arrangement allowed their preference to remain central without being named as central. They may say you have become harder to please, more sensitive, or less spontaneous. What they experience as complication may simply be the arrival of information your earlier compliance kept outside the bond. Their reaction does not automatically reveal bad intent. People often defend the form of connection they know, especially when that form allowed affection to move with little friction. They may genuinely love you and still miss the ease created by your self-concealment. Love can be real while its structure remains unequal. The end of that inequality can feel like loss before either person understands what has been lost. You may be tempted to restore the former ease when you see their discomfort. An apology forms before you have decided whether anything was wrong. Your throat tightens as they become quiet, and the old solution presents itself with remarkable clarity. You could withdraw the preference, soften the limit, or become useful again. The bond would warm quickly, but the warmth would carry the old price. Sometimes you do restore it. The pattern does not disappear because it has been recognized. You hear yourself saying that the issue was unimportant. Then feel the familiar distance from your own words. Yet recognition changes the aftermath. What once seemed like natural kindness now reveals its hidden exchange. Peace was purchased, but part of your presence was removed from the agreement. At other times, the discomfort remains without becoming catastrophe. The evening is less smooth. The other person needs time, and you do not know whether they fully understand. Nothing is elegantly resolved. yet affection does not vanish. This may feel less satisfying than a perfect repair, because there is no rush of reunion. There are simply two people carrying an unfinished difference without turning it into exile. This is where safe love stops being an ideal image and becomes an ordinary relational fact. It includes annoyance, misreading, fatigue, and moments when generosity is uneven. Safety is not proven by the absence of these experiences. It becomes visible in what they do not require. A misunderstanding does not require humiliation. A limit does not require emotional disappearance. A need does not become a permanent debt. The distinction also protects you from idealizing consistency. Someone may be reliable and still unable to meet you emotionally. They may remain present while refusing curiosity, complexity, or accountability. Calm alone is not the measure. The deeper evidence lies in whether reality can enter the relationship without one person having to reduce it until the other can remain comfortable. This makes discernment